to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Well, hey, welcome to episode 3 of the Straight to Video podcast. As always, I'm your host, Rob Lane, and once again, I want to thank you all for tuning in. If you're new to this podcast, then what I try to do is to speak to people who I look up to, admire, and respect from different parts of the entertainment industry, and we simply chat about their childhoods, how they grew up, and see what put them on the path to where they are today and what really fired that spark to make them pursue their dreams. Today we're speaking to Ryan Roxie. Roxie is probably best known as being the guitarist for out-and-out rock legend and icon Alice Cooper, who he began performing with back in 1996. Today he continues to be a mainstay in Alice's band, but that's really just one part of his story. In our chat, he'll fill in all the blanks about where his journey began, from the San Francisco Bay Area to his move to Hollywood and then eventually New York. Along the way, he shares some really great stories about Poison and Queen's Brian May, and listen out for a mention of a band called Head On. I'd not heard of this band, and from Roxy's description, I figured they'd be one of those unknown forever underground acts, but after a little digging, I discovered they had a couple of songs which would appear in Season 3 of Stranger Things. Talk about good things come to those who wait. For me, I became aware of Roxie back around the time he joined Alice's band, and I would see his name appear in Metal Edge magazine, who did a small piece on his new project, Dad's Porno Mag, which today I still think is one of the greatest band names ever. The vibe of that band really hit home with me. It had this hard rock edge, which I love, but it had this really fun vibe and sense of humour, and Roxie himself, he just oozed charisma and cool. Then I get to see him perform with Alice on the Brutal Planet tour, when he had these insanely cool blonde dreadlocks and this incredible stage presence which you just couldn't take your eyes off. And this is a guy performing alongside Alice freaking Cooper. So whilst doing Trash Bit magazine, I reached out to Ryan to do an interview to promote an album he had out then called Peace, Love and Armageddon for his band Roxy 77. It was an email interview which I've never been a fan of because you'd always tend to get like really simple and blunt answers, but when Roxy replied, he really went to town on the answers and he got a real feel of his personality just in the words. So that interview, it immediately became the cover story of that issue because it was so good. And since that day, I've been such a huge fan and have an amazing amount of respect for this guy and the way he approaches everything he does in the music industry. If you dig our chat, which I'm pretty sure you will, please dive into the Roxy rabbit hole because there's so much history and most importantly a massive catalogue of killer music. Everything can be found at www.ryanroxie.com. There's so much stuff on there, including information on his System 12 guitar method for anyone out there learning guitar, all his projects and links to his own podcast, In the Trenches, which is something definitely worth checking out after you've listened to the Straight to Video podcast, obviously. Man, I could ramble on for days, so I'm going to stop for now and let you enjoy our chat. Please follow and like the podcast so you don't miss out on future episodes, but in the meantime, please enjoy my talk with the mighty Ryan Roxie.
About the me generation, a bunch of little punks who need to take the medication. They don't know what's right, they just wanna make it through the night.
Am I right to understand you were born and raised close to San Francisco?
Yeah, you're right. Right, the Bay Area. That's the reason why to this day, the Oakland Raiders are my favorite love-hate team, NFL team. I grew up in the era of the Oakland Raiders in the 1970s, where they were sort of the bad boys of the NFL. And still to this day, we are Raider fans over here. But I thought you were going to start off with a question like, what's my favorite color? I'd have to say silver and black, I guess.
I could do like a flash quiz, just bullet point questions, but that might get boring pretty fast.
Do you like piñatas?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. just give you really want to go unconventional like that, you know?
How close were you to San Francisco, as in like the main city? Was it a little bit out of the way?
I grew up in the northern East Bay, they call it, about 40 minutes outside of the actual city.
Mm-hmm.
But because my parents, and now you can't even look at a house in this little cow town called Pleasanton that I grew up in. You can't even look at a house that's under like $1 million there, because everybody that made millions of dollars ended up moving to Pleasanton because they wanted to get out of the city,
Yeah.
during the .com eras and all that kind of stuff. So it's been exploding ever since. But when I grew up there, I literally grew up with cows on the side of the road. I went to a place called Foothill High School because it was on the foothills. It was right there. I played Little League Baseball with Joey Madden, who was John Madden, the coach of the Oakland Raiders, who I was just talking about, his son. So I grew up in this very sort of suburban neighborhood. I guess if you saw that movie, it's an old 70s movie called Over the Edge with, I think it was Matt Dillon's first film he ever made. That and a cross between Fast Times at Ridgemont High was my upbringing in the Bay Area. But the one thing that we had was killer kick-ass AM radio. We had an AM radio station called KFRC that would play Pointer Sisters next to Aerosmith, next to the Bee Gees, next to Cheap Trick. So you'd have this, I had disco and rock growing up, and that kind of gave me the pop sensibilities of the bands that I eventually wanted to emulate. And I always looked up to the Beatles, but all those pop sensibilities, they kind of were formed from listening to, ABBA, but then next to Black Sabbath. And this was the only radio station that I can think of. And it's on AM band, right? The sort of only sports talk radio band now these days. This was, me growing up listening to these incredible songs every single morning, waking up before school, every night going to bed.
You got me thinking of the Everclear song AM Radio. You kind of described all the lyrics to that in one fell swoop. I don't know if you've heard that song or not.
I didn't, but you know what? They wrote it and they wrote about it. And I think we're all from the same era, and it's true.
Yeah.
It really was. I mean, when I first discovered FM radio, and I know there's some kid out there going, what's AM? What's radio? Yeah, it's kind of, think of it like a really basic internet. And basically there's like AM and FM, and FM was like album oriented. And I only figured that out when I would go down to Los Angeles, because a lot of my mom's family, all her brothers and sisters, lived down in Los Angeles. So every summer we'd go down to Orange County where they lived, and I was turned on to FM radio. And I still remember one of the first songs I heard on FM radio was the LP version of The Sweets' Love is Like Oxygen. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't heard the entire uncut version, not the single version, just The Sweet Love's Like Oxygen, is such a great tune.
And that jumped out of the FM radio.
Oh, dude, it jumped to the right and to the left, because that was another thing. AM radio was mono, I think, pretty much, because that's all the only sort of radio receivers I had back in those days were these funky 70s, radios made out of that were in the box, the form of an egg, or in the form of a, pretzel or something. And then FM came around and it was stereo. It was left and right. And you put the headphones on and I was way too young to smoke pot, but I'm sure that a lot of my older cousins were. And that's where the head expanded.
Nice. So are you from a musical family as well?
I'm from a semi-musical family. Yeah, my father played trumpet, so I don't know how musical people consider that these days, other than
right?
making noise at a football game. If you play trumpet at a soccer game, football game, then yeah, I don't think people think that's as musical, just making noise. But my mom also played drums, and I played trumpet, drums, and then I eventually settled on the guitar, because there was a really, I wish I could remember the name of this brand, Rob. I really do, because I would buy the company, I think, at this point, if I could, because there was this really cool tobacco burst semi-acoustic guitar that was always laying on the couch. Nobody ever really played it, but I would sit there and strum it when I was before I even decided to take the guitar seriously. I just sit there and strum it because it was there. It was almost like a design piece, like you would, like everybody puts pillows on their couches now. This was like acoustic, semi-acoustic guitar, and I loved it. And it was that sort of was my calling card, 'cause the drums were too much hassle, to be honest with you. You too much hassle to set up and set down, and too loud. And whenever you practice, somebody told you to shut up. The trumpet, well, Trumpet's the trumpet. And the guitar.
Didn't hear much trumpet on FM radio.
It wasn't. But all the posters on my wall, they had guitars. And that seemed like a pretty good job that these guys on my wall had. They all seemed to be loving it. They all seemed super dreamy and probably just high, but a lot of them.
So which guys were on your wall?
Well, dude, all you have to do is look he's probably not high on it, but I would ask him if I ever interviewed him. The album cover of Frampton Comes Alive.
Okay.
With that purple hair and those backlights coming down. I mean, if that's not a guy that looks stoned that playing guitar just in the moment, I don't know what is. I've tried to recreate that moment hundreds of times on stage, just getting in the moment. But that album cover to me was one of the biggest ones.
Right.
And I wanted to be Peter Frampton at one point. I wanted curly hair. I wanted curly, blonde, thin, like thinnish hair. And I didn't. I had this thick, kind of not curly, but wavy, like sort of half Mexican, half Polish hair, which is what I am. So, yeah. Never got the hairstyle of Peter Frampton, but I did get the Les Pauls. And
there you go.
One of the reasons why I play a Les Paul.
Right. Cool, man. So have you have any brothers and sisters as well?
Only child. And I've been told through many, many relationships just how much of a classic only child I am.
The traits are there.
And it's not just like romantic relationships, it's band relationships, it's business relationships. I really tried to work a lot on it the last, the second half of your life. I think you get a second chance at some point. And I tried to really work hard on it and realize that there's so much more credit that people should give than they usually do. And I think for the first part of my life, I didn't give enough. And now I'm committed to doing it. Just like, like I said, I appreciate you having me on your podcast. I really do. We know each other because you're such a kick-ass bassist, and you've always been supporting what I've been doing, whether it's my solo stuff or whether it's with the bands that I've been in and been associated with. So the fact that I'm able to be on your podcast now, I'm really appreciative of that. Because I know it's going to be good.
So where did you spend your teenage and formative years? Was that in and around San Francisco too?
Yeah, the teenage years was spent in Northern California, but the minute I could get out of Northern California, and I had a pretty tumultuous relationship with my mom at that point. And God bless her, because she's always been supportive. She always was supportive. And I do love her very much. But back in those days, it wasn't a good scene. And I think we both kind of understood that I needed to try at least go for the dream that she had been supporting and I had been working on. And I bolted to Los Angeles when I was basically 17. Wow. The day almost the week after I graduated high school. And I graduated a little bit earlier. I got one of those weird birthdays. It's like right around the cutoff date. So, instead of my parents holding me back a year, they kind of pushed me forward. So it was kind of cool in a sense. I got a little bit of a head start, but kind of sucked when I went down to LA and I couldn't get into clubs at all for like 3 or 4 years. Not that I didn't try, to, have fake IDs and all that kind of stuff. It just, it worked out horribly. The few times I did have or try to attempt to get into clubs where they were IDing us. Right. But back in those days, to be honest with you, Rob, you didn't even need to have ID to have the most kick-ass time on a Friday night or Saturday night in Los Angeles, California. Because you could go right to the parking lot of the Rainbow Bar and Grill when the Rainbow Bar and Grill closed at 2 a.m. because they called it became a new club. It became a whole new club called the Rock and Roll Parking Lot. And that's when I guess I have the Rock and Roll Parking Lot. It was the Rainbow Parking Lot. And at 2 a.m., all these rock stars would start, sort of stumbling out of the Rainbow Bar and Grill. For those of you that don't know about the Rainbow Bar and Grill, then you probably don't know anything about rock and roll. And you're probably a classical trumpeter right now listening.
Roxie coming in hot
pretty
on that
much.
One.
Well, dude, if you don't know about the Rainbow Bar and Grill, then you got to dive down that rabbit hole now and just Google it and just figure it all out, because that's where so much of the music that we all love was discussed, talked about, formed. Bands formed and broke up at the Rainbow Bar and Grill on a nightly basis, I think. So, but at the end of the evening, there'd be this sort of parking lot scene, and that's when you'd see these guys like the guys in Rat and Motley Crue and Dio's band. I just remember all these people piling out of there, and I didn't have any idea to get in, but I eventually became part of that second wave with the bands like Poison and Faster Pussycat, GNR, Jane's Addiction. Obviously, I was playing in a band called Candy, and we kind of like a sucker fish. We kind of latched on to some of those bigger bands, and we were able to play a lot of pretty cool shows. And Candy eventually evolved into a band called Electric Angels, which actually opened up pretty much for every big band in Los Angeles, but didn't get our own record deal.
Right.
So that's when we decided. Maybe I'm moving ahead, but that's when we decided to move to New York City.
Gotcha.
As a band.
Just to pull it back to the San Francisco thing a little bit. Jet Boy were from San Francisco as well. I just wondered if you crossed paths with them when they first started out.
I have a great story.
Okay.
Because here's the deal. Jet Boy was a Bay Area band, but I was a huge fan of the Bay Area band Head On. And I know that Fergie, who was in Jet Boy, was Head On's guitar roadie at that point. I think he was one of the before they were called techs, they actually were called roadies. And he was one of the guys, because this band, honestly, from the Bay Area, if you can go on Google and find out 80s San Francisco rock band Head On, one of the best bands that I've, to this day, best front man, singer, guitar player combination. They were so friggin' cool.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. These guys and Jet Boy knew Head On. I didn't really hook up with Jet Boy until we were all living down in Los Angeles. And I remember the days of us playing the same clubs. They'd put like 5 or 6 bands on, and we'd be side by side. It was just a cool camaraderie back in those days between all the Los Angeles bands. Because as competitive as we were also supportive. Because we kind of knew that if one of the bands made it, the other bands could ride the coattails of that band.
Right.
And, when we all saw Guns N' Roses for the first time, we kind of knew that was going to be one of the bands. Jane's Addiction was one of the bands that you could sort of bank on getting a lot of attention at your shows if you were on the same bill as them, because everybody was sort of coming to put their, watch them, put their eyes on them and stuff. And Jet Boy was definitely one of those bands. I mean, Billy Rowe, one of the guitarists from Jet Boy, who to this day is such a great guitar builder himself. We have a really good relationship. He's worked on a bunch of my guitars. But I just remember him, just like me, taking it all in, learning, seeing what was going on, and then taking it back to your own band and trying to have your band one up the other without, not backstabbing, not slagging, but just looking at what another band did. Hey, they did that good. Maybe I could do this better.
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing missing with this whole new era of bands, and less live shows. Obviously this year is a write-off, but before that, with up and coming bands and scenes, I was really, really lucky to be part of some cool band scenes where, the mid 80s was probably the most famous one I was involved with, because that was the hair metal scene. I was also in a band that was up in the Seattle area, Seattle, Washington area, during that sort of post grunge, or right around the, tail end of grunge, with bands like Presidents of the United States. And I was in a band called Sweetwater from them up there. And I could see that same camaraderie that they would hang out with Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. Everyone was just hanging out in the same scene. That's what it was like in Los Angeles. I just wish that, today there would be a new sort of town that creates that.
Mm-hmm.
People do have to understand that it's not just one band that can start a scene. It's a collection of bands. Maybe one band will rise above and sort of carry the torch of that scene, but there has to be more than just one band.
Do you think the public picks up on that, and that's one of the reasons for the success of it, because it feels so real? For comparison, how kind of the Seattle scene impacted so huge, perhaps record labels were picking too many pop metal bands and just throwing them out there, whereas the Seattle movement came in and it just felt real to everybody and like a breath of fresh air.
I think everybody wants to have a sense of belonging to something, being part of something, especially if you're part of something on the early stages. And I hear a lot of flack from being part of the LA metal scene. It was hairspray and it was makeup, and grunge was sort of the antithesis of that. But to be honest with you, it felt just as special to be part of this hairspray, glammed up, way too much makeup on, like with everybody in the same room, guys and girls, because girls wanted to be the part of it too. They wanted to be in bands. They wanted to be part of the show. They wanted to be part of, and guys wanted to be there as well. They didn't play instruments. It became more of a social thing that you had to be a part of. And I think, that it's really important for scenes to develop on their own and get that sort of following, that group following. And of course, just like anything, once a business person sees the opportunity in that, then it can get exploited, and it's what happens. But at the same time, this day and age, we're at a great place to start a bunch of really cool scenes.
Yeah.
Because where are we at? We're back to square one. We're back to ground zero of like, okay, there's no place to play at right now in this current environment. All we can do is start jamming and forming stuff. And maybe we can reach out to some other bands that are in the same position as us, and then we can do something online. But then that is going to attract a bit of a crowd. So I think it's really, the stage is set for a bunch of new scenes to come out. And I hope it does.
Everybody get their heads together and figure out how to help each other out rather than just focusing on themselves.
That's always been the goal.
Yeah.
But it does get tough. I mean, as you know, I guess it's tough for people to think that it can happen because you tried so many different ways to make something happen on your own. And it's really tough for people to believe it. Well, if I just trust in the group and if I just sort of lay into more of the group mentality, it will work, because we've seen so many times where it's so hard to do it because you're trying. But honestly, it's something I've learned in the last few years to really trust other people's ability and not try to be such a control freak as I am. And I'm self-admitted, I love to be hands-on. I love to be part of decision-making. I love to be part of the whole process. But now I realize that sometimes it's better to take a step back and let who's good at that particular thing shine and give them the credit for it as well.
Yeah. It's that putting trust in other people. Like you say, I'm the same. I'm like a control freak. I want to micromanage everything and all that kind of stuff.
It always seems like a good idea until nothing happens.
Right.
We're like, shit. Yeah. For me, the thing that I've learned most is that if I can set a goal and I can actually visualize myself having already achieved that goal, and I do something. That's the thing. You have to do. You can't just, this whole law of attraction, it just speak out and it'll come to you. Bullshit. It ain't going to come to you. You have to do something to get it every single day. But you can't overanalyze the process of how you're going to get to that goal. You just have to keep imagining that you have achieved it. And I guarantee you, someday you look back and you go, oh yeah, I did achieve it. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting it to go that way. I think it's our minds that try to overanalyze how we're supposed to get to where we're supposed to be going that do us in a lot of times.
We're a bunch of overthinkers.
Well, I'm learning that sometimes it's good to think, not good to overthink.
Yeah. When the lure, let's call it the lure of Hollywood and Los Angeles came into the picture, How did you find it arriving onto the scene? Did you find it easy to settle in? Did you come to join a particular band, or did you just get there to find something?
I did the thing that any kid would want to do in a rock and roll fantasy dream. I lived right off of Hollywood Boulevard on Orchid Avenue, and I lived in a single room apartment with a really good friend of mine that I had met through the ultimate place to hang out back in those days, which was GIT. I went to a guitar school.
Okay.
And I don't think that it taught me to be a shredder or a music aficionado or some sort of world-class musician. I'm not. But at the same time, it taught me really great practice habits. It taught me that there's more to music than just playing 8 to 10 hours a day. There's actually a whole part of marketing yourself. It's just being in the scene. So I was, 17 years old, living in Hollywood, California, going out at night, practicing during the day, trying to get work anywhere, any way I could in the off time. I actually ended up doing sound for $50 a night. I remember I was running sound, and I'm self-professed the worst sound man on the planet.
Guitar on 10, bass
So
is
I
bass.
apologize now to all the bands that I would probably just be semi-drunk, semi-stoned, trying to mix their sound on a Tuesday or Wednesday night at Madam Wong's West. I do apologize. But at the same time, that's where I met lifelong connections, lifelong band friends, and lifelong bands that would eventually lead me to one band to the next, which eventually led me to Alice Cooper. Because
Exactly.
that's where I met Gilby Clarke. That's where I met Jonathan and John Schubert. That's where Electric Angels, basically Candy and Electric Angels, kind of formed out of the Madam Wong's ashes. That's how one musical relationship can always lead to the next.
You got, like I say, you got to go out there and put the legwork in, meet people, and the same across every business, networking.
Oh yeah, and know your instrument too. But you know what? Here's a funny story, Rob. I don't really tell this one all that often because it sounds unbelievable. But the way I met Bret Michaels from Poison was because my guitar was stolen out of the back of my truck. And I lived, again, I'd upgraded myself, moved over from Orchid Avenue over to the next block called Orange Avenue. And I lived in this place called the Madison. And it was a 12-story apartment building. Back in those days, to live in a 12-story apartment building, holy crap, you must have had a trust fund. I didn't. I just lived with 3 or 4 other guys at the same time. And my room was like the living room and a couch, I think. So I had this truck, this little Ford Courier, I believe, mini truck. And for some stupid reason, I left my guitar in the back of it for like 10 minutes, run up to the apartment to get something and come back down. The doors smashed, the windows smashed.
Jeez.
I'm like, shit. That was my Ibanez Destroyer. That was my candy apple red Ibanez Destroyer because I couldn't afford a Gibson Explorer guitar. How the fuck am I going to be able to get this back? And then my friend goes, well, you should talk to the band that knows every single person in Hollywood. You should talk to Bret and the guys from Poison. They live right across the street from you.
What year was this?
This must have been, it was right. I'll tell you this. It had to have been before CeCe joined the band because the story gets more interesting. So this was 83, 3 or 84 or 85, one of those years, pick a year. So I go across the street. I get introduced to Bret. Honestly, their apartment made my apartment look like a penthouse. It was so thrashed, like what you would exactly what you would expect in like any sort of rock and roll movie, like with, tin cans of beans half open and, microwave oven dinners and TV dinners just sort of thrown around. And it was mattresses on the floor. There was no such thing as it was basically a flop house. But Bret made 2 or 3 phone calls. And honestly, by that afternoon, they found out that some junkie had taken my guitar, saw that I had left my truck, broke the window real quick. He actually buried the guitar because his master plan was going to be to bury the guitar, let everything cool off, and then he was going to pawn it. So basically, with dirt like in my case, in the guitar case, we ended up getting the guitar back, and I will forever be thankful to Bret Michaels. And here's the interesting thing. During that time, he played me a bunch of demos that eventually became the Look What the Cat Dragged In album. Because when I was sitting there, when he was making phone calls, and obviously no cell phones in those days, he was making just regular phone calls on a regular phone. And he was talking, saying, yeah, man, I want you to listen to some of my stuff. This is what we're going to put out. And some of the songs I heard back in those days on really early demo form was I Want Action. I remember I Want Action as being one of them.
Yeah.
So there you go.
That's super cool.
So yeah, that's one of the stories where like, Bret would look at it and goes like, oh, I didn't know I helped Ryan Roxie get his guitar. Because I was probably just this kid again, just like him, is like just trying to help another person. And he did, because he knew everybody. That band they were the perfect reason. They were the reason why, the inspiration behind flyering.
Right.
They had street teams. I think, I don't know who came up with the first street team, but I will give them credit for that.
Yeah.
They were able to seduce women and sort of bro dudes, like, hey bro, would you help me out here? They had a team, man, men and women and girls were in love with them, and they would just pass out flyers every Friday and Saturday night. I mean, they're probably responsible for a quarter of the world's global warming.
Or at least keeping Hollywood printers in business for that kind of period.
Yeah, maybe that. The Kinko's, they probably rose Kinko's stock. Their carbon footprint of the world. Poison is the one to blame in the history books.
Super cool. When you spoke to AC Slade on your own podcast recently, AC said he always considered you a New York guy. And I was going to say, have you spent a lot of time in New York outside of touring? Was that through Electric Angels? Did you relocate there?
When we were with Electric Angels, we had pretty much exhausted every single venue, every single band we could open up for. Every single label had passed on us. And, every major label had passed on Electric Angels. So we said, you know what? Everyone's moving to Los Angeles to find fame and fortune. Let's move east. Let's move to the exact opposite of the world. And for us, the rock and roll world of the States. And it was New York City. And I got to be honest with you, within 3 shows of landing in New York City, we were signed. We were signed by the same label that passed on us in Los Angeles. We just got signed by a different A&R people from the Atlantic label. So that's what our album came out on. And I did live in New York for a bunch of years. I enjoyed it. It was another type of music scene. There was a camaraderie about it. There was a bunch of bands. I remember the first band that we ever played with was Circus of Power,
right,
at Lemore's East. Man, that was a cool show to do. And then I think our second or third show was the Limelight, Sunday Limelight. All these names I'm dropping right now with clubs, they're not there anymore, but I'm sure if you go down that Google rabbit hole, you can find out such cool things about it, because so much rock and roll history, Rock and Roll Limelight. And then we ended up getting signed at a place called Bond Street, because we were opening up for a band called Dogs D'Amour and what would eventually become Pearl Jam.
Right.
The band before Pearl Jam.
Mother Love Bone.
Mother Love Bone.
Yeah.
Yes. Mother Love, because the singer passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Andrew Wood.
Tragic scene. Yes. And so Mother Love Bone was opening a tour for Dogs D'Amour. Well, we were added to that show, Electric Angels. The A&R people came early thinking that they wanted to see Mother Love Bone. They saw Electric Angels thinking it was Mother Love Bone.
Wow.
And they liked it so much. And they said, oh, this isn't Mother Love Bone? We like this band, but we want to sign them. So we actually got signed through that show. And I, again, very thankful to Mother Love Bone and Dogs D'Amour. And to this day, I still have contact with Joe. I see him at least virtually online and stuff. So Tyler is obviously an influence of mine. So it's just so funny that the guys in Mother Love Bone became pretty much the biggest of the big.
It'd be interesting to see what had happened if Andrew Wood hadn't have passed away, what would have come of Mother Love Bone, because he was an amazing frontman. He kind of molded in a way, the Hollywood hard rock look, but with what was becoming more of a grunge sound in a way. That might have been an interesting path.
Exactly. He was sort of he was the, how do you call that? The gateway. He was the gateway to Seattle scene in a sense, because
he kind of looked like the David Lee Roth of grunge.
He took a bunch of influence of Los Angeles, and then he sort of melded it into this music that was becoming popular up in the Northwest. And that's how that scene created. Well, you know what? Not that much different than when I was telling you earlier, when we would go and watch bands and go, hey, what are they doing? What could we do better?
Exactly.
And that's what they did.
It appears you can adapt reasonably well to different environments. Obviously, now living in Sweden, you seem to really acclimatize and absorb whatever the culture is around you. Do you think that's a similar part of your character, which has allowed you to be a good touring musician as well? You can just adapt to scenarios and the surroundings.
Although I've never really thought about it, Rob, that you kind of nailed it, right? Just right there.
Right.
You know, you took the hammer right on the head of the nail, because that is the key, honestly, to being a, I guess, quote unquote, professional musician. You have to learn how to deal with so many different situations, not just equipment situations, not just musical situations, personality situations. Yeah. And if you're have any talent at all at being able to adapt to different situations quickly, that's going to help you like beyond any sort of musical training that you have, because it's those relationships that you can form with other musicians that'll always get you that next gig, and being able to deal with other people's egos, because we all have them. Whether you want to say, well, I'm not egotistical, I'm really humble. Bullshit. Everybody has an ego. I don't care. I don't care if you're the nicest guy in the world. So you're thinking something of yourself, and if you don't, then you're just bullshitting yourself, because you know what? You have to think a bit of yourself. You have to think highly enough of yourself that you deserve to have your sort of place in the sun at that given moment. And I completely understand the support role, and I completely understand being a band member. Mm-hmm. But you know what? There's a reason why you get that spotlight, this time of night, or, all the time. It's because you believe in yourself enough. So it's that balance. It's that constant balance of dealing with your own ego, but understanding everybody else has that same sort of ego that they deal with, and some deal with it better than others. But if you can learn how to adapt and flow with those changes, as well as flowing with a change of playing a club, an arena, and a stadium all in a 24-hour period, that is something that it'll help you in the long run. And the reason why I say that, the club and the arena and the tour and the stadium, is because that's what I was able to do along with the rest of the guys in the Alice Cooper band. We did that on this last run in Australia. I'm not joking. Within a 24-hour span, we played an arena show on Alice Cooper tour. And right after the show, we went to a small little dingy club, great rock and roll atmosphere type of club in Australia called Frankie's Pizza. And we played a club show with a band called the Goon Squad. That's what we call ourselves when we're not with Alice Cooper, the guys. Then the very next day, we played a stadium opening up for Queen. And so within the 24-hour period.
Just an average week.
Well, I called it something. I'm trying to remember what I fucking called it. It was like the ACS or SAC, the Sack Pack. That was what it is. Stadium Arena Club. The Sack Pack is what we called ourselves. If you're part of the Sack Pack, motherfucker, then it's something to be proud of. If you've played a stadium, arena, and club all in a 24-hour period, congratulations.
You get the membership card. Taking it right back to the beginning, but can we end with you maybe letting us know your biggest fanboy pinch me moment you've had since becoming a professional touring musician? And have you mastered the art of holding in the excitement and just playing it cool?
No, I never do. I'm kind of always that fanboy, but I don't ever want to lose that as well. I kind of want to be like, at the same time, though, I want to feel, and I do feel, that I belong in the room. And that's important to have that sort of confidence, knowing like, hey, I'm sitting in the same room
Right.
with these guys.
That's a cool way of looking at it.
You know, there's a reason for it. There's a reason why you are in that room to begin with. So then that gives me a little bit less reason to fanboy out. But I got to be honest with you, the first time that Brian May from Queen, he's one of my big, guitar heroes, a lot of people's guitar heroes. But for me, pound for pound, best guitar player, rock star. All his parts complement ultimately the song. Great rock and roll attitude, great image, just, nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
So he comes to play with us, and of all places, it's London. So we're playing, Wembley Arena. It's not Wembley Stadium. Haven't played Wembley Stadium yet, so knock on wood, that happens. But Wembley Arena, which is fine enough. I'm happy with that. And Brian May comes up because he knows Eric Singer. And first of all, I get to meet him backstage, and he's got the guitar.
The guitar.
So already I'm a little bit, the one guitar, right? And I'm freaking out. So can I touch it? Just looking at it, and I get to hold it, and I'm freaking. But then all of a sudden, the big moment is when we play our show. Last song of the set, everyone knows it's coming. Everyone knows the school's out. But then Eric Singer starts with a boom, boom, cha,
Wow.
boom, boom, cha, boom, boom, cha. And every hand does this fucking Live Aid. Hands up in the air. I feel like I'm in a mini Live Aid. And then Brian May, a silhouette of Brian May comes up from the side of the stage, and motherfucker's only got one AC30 amp, but it's louder than all of our Marshall stacks put together. And he just comes out and just starts rocking the fucking beginning of We Will Rock You. He does that thing, and we go right into School's Out.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, it became one of my top 5 rock moments to top 1. That's it.
What a combo, though, to actually get to meet him then to play with him on stage as well. That's pretty damn cool.
It was a great situation, but you know what? I've realized that there can always be more.
Okay,
because
right.
there can always be more situations. You put it out there what you want, and like I said, I'm ready to have more of those amazing moments.
Yeah.
Because rock and roll and music and everything that we love about music is about moments. And when we listen to our favorite song, it brings us back to some really special moment. When you hear a certain song, it's like, oh, I remember that. That's that feeling I had, or that era of time. And so I look forward to many more moments,
That's cool, man. That's a great way to wrap things up for sure. I like it. Motivational YouTube video. That was right there.
I will come back whenever you have me, Rob. It's been a pleasure being on your show.
There he was, Ryan Roxie. I want to thank Ryan for such a great and at times inspiring chat, parts of which kind of went in a direction I wasn't expecting, with all the talk of creating new scenes and, in the words of his own album, imagine your reality. Be sure to hit up ryanroxie.com for lots of other cool stuff, and once again I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the Straight to Video podcast. I'm going to continue to put these talks out as often as I can, and I'm really appreciative of all the feedback you send in my way. Please like, follow, share, and if possible, throw a rating or review if you listen on Apple Podcasts, and let's see how big we can make this thing. So until next time, take care and speak soon.